The term Rainbow Nation is a metaphorical expression that was popularized by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and later embraced by Nelson Mandela to describe the diversity of post-apartheid South Africa. This phrase reflects the idea that South Africa, with its myriad ethnicities, cultures, and races, can be compared to a rainbow, a spectrum of colors and diversity coming together to form a united and harmonious whole. The Rainbow Nation concept celebrates the diversity of South Africa's population, encompassing various ethnicities, languages, and cultural traditions. It emphasizes the idea that despite this diversity, people can come together and live harmoniously as one nation. The term gained prominence in the post-apartheid era as a symbol of the country's transition from a history of racial segregation and oppression to a democratic, inclusive society. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a prominent anti-apartheid activist and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, is often credited with coining the term Rainbow Nation to capture the vision of a united, reconciled South Africa. Nelson Mandela embraced the concept and used it in his speeches to promote reconciliation, inclusivity, and the building of a non-racial society. The idea was particularly emphasized during Mandela's presidency 1994 to 1999 as part of the nation-building process. The notion of the Rainbow Nation was reflected in sports, particularly during the 1995 Rugby World Cup. Mandela's support for the predominantly white national rugby team, traditionally associated with Afrikaner heritage, became a symbol of unity and reconciliation. While the concept of the Rainbow Nation is aspirational, it has faced criticism for not fully addressing the deep-rooted socio-economic inequalities and persistent racial tensions that persist in South Africa. The term continues to be a subject of ongoing discourse and debate within South Africa as the country grapples with issues of inequality, social justice, and the legacy of apartheid. South Africa's rich cultural tapestry is celebrated through various cultural events, festivals, and public holidays that highlight the diversity of its people. The Rainbow Nation concept remains an integral part of South Africa's identity and national narrative. It symbolizes the ongoing journey toward a more inclusive, tolerant, and just society. While the concept of the Rainbow Nation encapsulates the ideals of unity and diversity, it is important to recognize that achieving these ideals requires ongoing efforts to address historical injustices and promote social and economic equity. The term serves as both an aspiration and a reminder of the work still needed to build a truly inclusive and harmonious nation. Apartheid was a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination that was enforced by the National Party government in South Africa from 1948 to the early 1990s. The term apartheid is derived from the Afrikaans word meaning apartness. The system was characterized by the systematic oppression of the majority black population by the minority white government. Here are key features and aspects of apartheid. Apartheid laws mandated the strict separation of different racial groups, primarily between whites and non-whites. Various aspects of life, including residential areas, education, healthcare, and public amenities, were segregated along racial lines. The Population Registration Act of 1950 classified South Africans into racial groups: white, black, colored, mixed race, and Indian. Individuals were assigned a racial identity that determined their legal rights and privileges. The Group Areas Act of 1950 assigned specific geographic areas for different racial groups. This resulted in forced removals of non-white communities from areas designated for white settlement. Past laws restricted the movement of black South Africans. They were required to carry passbooks, which determined where they could live and work. Passbook checks were conducted, and those found without valid passes faced arrest and deportation. Education was segregated, with different schools for different racial groups. The Bantu Education Act of 1953 established a separate and inferior education system for black South Africans aimed at preparing them for menial jobs. The Reservation of Separate Amenities Act reserved certain jobs and professions exclusively for whites. Labor laws were used to exploit black workers by paying lower wages and limiting their rights to organize. Political opposition to apartheid was brutally suppressed. Organizations like the African National Congress, ANC, and the Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC, were banned. Activists faced imprisonment, torture, and exile. Apartheid policies created homelands or Bantustans designated as independent states for different black ethnic groups. These were intended to strip black South Africans of their citizenship rights. The apartheid era saw significant resistance from the black majority. Protests, strikes, and acts of civil disobedience were met with state violence. Apartheid faced increasing international condemnation, leading to economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation of South Africa. Internally, the anti-apartheid movement gained momentum, with the ANC and other organizations leading protests and resistance. In 1990, President F.W. de Klerk announced the unbanning of political organizations, including the ANC, and the release of Nelson Mandela from prison after 27 years. Mandela and de Klerk engaged in negotiations to end apartheid and facilitate the transition to a democratic, multiracial South Africa. South Africa's first multiracial democratic elections were held in 1994. Nelson Mandela became the country's first black president. Apartheid left a lasting legacy of social, economic, and political inequality. The post-apartheid era has been dedicated to addressing these legacies, promoting reconciliation, and building a more inclusive and just society in South Africa.